Assalamualaikum and almost good afternoon. Firstly, I'd like to start by thanking Petra and Professor Volker for inviting me here. The slide says I'm chairman of the Securities Commission Malaysia, but this is not the Securities Commission Malaysia. It's a very personal point of view. So why am I here? I'm an alumni. So like the ambassador, I was here a little bit earlier than you. Though in those days, we didn't have this pretty incredible law faculty. I'm not an academic. I'm not a technologist or a judge, though I am married to a judge, so I know what it's like to be judged. I'm actually a lawyer and a chartered accountant. And in fact, the reason why I'm in the UK is because I sit on the council of ICW down in London. I retired as chairman of PwC Malaysia last year. And I was only very recently appointed to this role, well, 106 days actually ago. So I'm here to also learn. And I realize in the discussions that I've been hearing that clearly there's a lot to learn. But I still go back to the sense that this is a whole society problem. So it's not fair to say the judges need to fix it. It's not fair to say the governments need to fix it or international agreements. And I'm very interested to see your take on it, Professor, because it's clear that when there is some vested interest, things happen. So being a capital market regulator, why is that interesting? So in a way, capital market regulators try to encourage their masters, in this case the ministries, the politicians, to look at things in a very long-term view. And so what I hope to do over the next few minutes is just talk about three aspects which were given to me as a brief: the role of different stakeholders, policies of critical transition, and the role of sustainable finance. Let me run through the slides very quickly. Next, please. So I'm going to show you two slides to show the macro mission in my part of the world. So everyone says 2050 or 2060, inshallah. Next slide. And then we have some very interesting definitions from him. Not quite sure what's up with them. So the takeaway is we have set targets, but I don't think we know how to get there. Okay, so it's an aspirational. Next slide. So one thing about Malaysians is we love a good plan. So we started saying 2060, and then through some intervention, through some very well-meaning people, the government said, okay, we'll move it to 2050. And then we made them realize that we need a plan. And so we have lots of plans. We have the National Climate Change Policy, the National Energy Policy, the National Energy Transition Policy, and then a few other things coming in. But one of the things I realized is the point that was made by Justice Shah yesterday, which is in a way we're talking about the wrong thing, because energy transition is bankable. It's easy to get funds to do that, but who's going to fund adaptation and mitigation? And I think that's possibly one of my takeaways from this conference, is that maybe we should be talking about adaptation. Next slide. Now this is basically our history. So we were net zero up until 2004. So within living memory, 20 years ago. The reason why we can continue to emit more is because we've got huge forested areas. So 50%, government says 52%, but 50% of Malaysia is still forested. But what we also appreciate is that we're being used. So a lot of people come to offer us FDI, but it seems like they're trying to escape their own rules in their country. So I have one which is the make, where we're very proud about installing ICE engine cars in Malaysia. Until I pointed out it would be probably 20% more expensive if we actually imported it from Europe. So the other takeaway is we're insignificant. It's only 1%. And I think even around the region, it's relatively low. Although 600 million people live in this area, and our GDP is average 5 to 6%. Next. So as a capital market regulator, where do we intersect with climate change? Really, there are three areas: taxonomy, sustainable reporting, and transition. So taxonomy really talks to defining behaviors that we want to encourage, and saying that if you do those things that we don't encourage, we'll penalize you. So taxonomies are important. You have one in the EU, I'll talk about that in the ASEAN perspective. And it has not been that useful. Because the difficulty is everyone seems to want a tax break. And so when I looked at our green bonds, it all seems to be solar panel farms. So that's an issue because it takes up arable land. So that's taxonomy. What I've been concentrating on the last 106 days is to get the reporting framework out. Now, why that's important, I mean, we talked a lot about emission numbers of countries and states, but actually it comes down to each company. So for some of you who may not know, last year, something called the ISSB issued their standards. What is ISSB? It's a kind of an offshoot of the accounting board. And in fact, the name of the standard is actually IFRS S1, IFRS S2. S1 talks about general indicators, S2 talks about climate. But the interesting thing about the standard is, it's not about how to calculate that. I mean, you guys kind of know that. The question that the standard poses is, what's the impact of climate change on your company? And are you informing your investors about the impact? So in a way, we're now moving from talking generalities about trying to reduce things to actually a reporting framework where companies have to own up and say what their emissions are, what they're doing about it. And the way we will punish them is if they lie. So I know some of you are looking at the roles and responsibilities of directors, but I think the S1, S2 standards will change the game because all of us are adopting it. I believe 20 jurisdictions have already adopted it for implementation. It is actually encouraged by ISO, which is the body for regulators. And so I see this as being quite a big change. I have to say it wasn't very popular when we announced it. Transition, I think, is self-explanatory. We talked about moving the energy to renewables. But I think the problem with transition is how long will you do this transition? Next slide. So this is our ASEAN taxonomy. The main difference between this and EU is that we have amber categories. Because we realize you can't just switch off and suddenly have renewables. So we need transition. Though I must admit, I've had some very bizarre conversations with Indonesians who are desperate to convince me that there is such a thing as clean coal. So if any of you have seen some, please let me know. But anyway, so we do have a taxonomy for the ASEAN region. I would say it's going to be very difficult for many countries to comply, but aspirationally, everyone has said they'll sign up to it. So we're now in iteration 3. Iteration 4 is where some of the more interesting issues will be, particularly around agriculture and water supply. Next slide. This is just an example. I mean, many of the ASEAN countries have something similar. So we have a taxonomy for essentially green bonds. But I think when we came out with this a few years ago, we actually put a social component in because we realized that it's not just about the environment, particularly the points that have been raised earlier, that you also have to look at the indigenous people too. Next slide. So this is what I announced a week ago. Basically, the implementation of S1 and S2 will be staggered. So the first group, 131 companies representing 84% of the market, will adopt it next year. But we are giving them dispensation to 2027 to figure out what's for 3 years. The rest follow on. I think the other difference that we've taken compared to other regulators is I'm actually mandating that the opinion that the verifier gives is not a limited assurance opinion, but a reasonable assurance. What's the difference? A limited assurance that says, yeah, it's true, that's what they're doing. A reasonable assurance opinion actually says, but they forgot to mention this. So I noticed in the UK press that a UK bank was censured by the Advertising Authority for having lovely adverts about what they're doing with green, but missing out the fact that they're the number 6 global bank in terms of loans supporting the oil and gas industry. And your advertising authority took task for that. Next. sorry, I realize you've also got PACE, so do we. It's our PACE stands for Policy Assumptions, Calculators, and Education, because I realize that the bigger companies are what they're doing, but I have 1,014 companies, and they're not very good, the smaller ones. So we're going to have to do a lot of hand-holding. Next. Energy transition. So again, we've got a plan. It's going to cost us a lot of money, but I think our capital markets can cope with this because they are bankable projects. Next. Okay, I put this in to my colleagues from Pakistan because one of the problems I found, certainly as a practitioner, was that it's difficult talking about Islamic finance when you cannot demonstrate it actually has something to say about the climate emergency. So even before I became chairman for 2 years, we were ding-donging with the scholars, trying to understand, well, how do you move Islamic finance in a slightly different direction where it answers other questions other than halal? And what they came up with actually came from more this thing called Maqasid al-Sharia. And essentially what it means is the true meaning of Sharia. And so we are looking at justice and benevolency, clarity and transparency, and so on. And climate comes on principle 3, undertaking initiatives in preserving the well-being of future generations. So that means already we have an intergenerational aspiration. I can't say that I was completely happy with this, but we certainly are using it a lot in Malaysia. Next. Well, there are various comments, but maybe I should kind of conclude with a few observations like this. I feel that as a capital market regulator, we just don't know enough. And we tend to operate at the speed of the slowest. So if you want to influence things, you need to influence the ISO. Because I get a sense from the meetings and so on, that they kind of get it, but no one wants to move it too fast. And I don't think we have time. So that will be the first messaging. The second messaging really is, and it goes back to Professor Scott's slide, we're not asking for your money. What we're asking is the technology to do it. Because, I mean, no one gets a free meal, right? But there are technologies being discussed, which we have no concept of. So I know my neighbors down in Singapore have done a digital twin, but it's easy, it's a city. You know, how difficult can that be? And so that would be the ask, I think, from our point of view. I don't need your money, but I do need your knowledge, because this is a whole society, a whole planet problem. And we are quite capable of solving some of the problems ourselves, but we definitely need direction. So with that, I'm going to stop and hand over to the next speaker. Thank you very much.
As there is a need to go, so we will now have some questions for Faiz and then we will see the panel. Any questions? Yes.
Thank you very much. My name is Mohammad Faiz. I wanted to ask you about ISSB and F1 and S2 and the adoption in jurisdiction and the payoff for support, which is fabulous. But I'm from the Netherlands, and we know CCSRD, we take a double materiality approach. I just wondered whether you could say anything about what you feel about single materiality or double materiality.
So the thing about a standard is you can always change it. I don't personally agree with that perspective of ISSB, but I think it was an expedient one. But maybe something I should make clear, not every jurisdiction will make it law. Now, in my jurisdiction, even accounting standards have the force of law. So as a regulator, I can go after people if they don't apply the standard. We are changing the law to extend the same legal framework around sustainability standards. So that gives me a bit more bite. But I know that debate. That's why I believe even the Europeans are not convinced about following ISSB. You have your own ESRS, I believe. we have to agree to disagree. But what I would say is that in our high part of the world, they're not looking at ESRS. They're not looking at whatever the Americans want to come up with. They're much more comfortable with ISSP.
Thank you. Thank you. I think you said a very, very important thing at the very end there. That it's not that you need help with technology, it's the knowledge. And I think that's a very, very different thing. But I would like to know as to how do we actually do that to do this knowledge transfer or capacity building well, because I think in every single project that has been happening in the last 20 years, capacity building is being on there as words, but it's not really happening. So I would just really like to have some ideas of how we can make this better.
Let me give you an example. I read that in Florida, they actually use the air conditioning compressors to heat up the water in their pool. Now, I tried in Malaysia to look for an air conditioning guy who can do this, and they had no idea. So it seems to me that there needs to be an incentive to do things. What I would like to do in Malaysia is to make our electricity rates commercial. They're not, they're subsidized. And as a result, you have the wrong behaviors. I think only when you start to put proper pricing into electricity will it force people to then think, gee, I need to find some other way of doing this. So it's a kind of roundabout way of saying that actually the impetus is on us. We need to go out with Townstown Sovereign Wealth Fund, with going around to buy up companies around the world that have technology to bring it back. So I know, for example, they bought something in San Francisco, not quite climate related, but what it does is it scans your knees, because we realize that most knee joints are like shoes, you know, the sizes, but it doesn't exactly fit. So this outfit has brought the technology back to Malaysia so that we can scan and replace knees with, if you like, purpose designed ones based on the shape of your knee. So that's what we're now doing. We're not waiting for this amazing, you know, this 100 trillion fund to suddenly pop up and save all of us. I think we have to take steps to do things. But I feel that there's certain levers that we need to pull to encourage that desire to go and learn.
Thank you. We have one last question.
Sure.
Do you have any model to share with us the Islamic Sharia climate finance board facilitating done by Islamic Development Bank in Jeddah or in Malaysia? Because we're taking this topic in COP29 now, where we're focusing into climate finance, is focusing into Sharia Islamic finance. Is some guideline issued by recently by the Islamic Development Bank in Jeddah.
So I believe we're the largest sukuk issuer in the world. In fact, one of my clients, ex-clients, had a title, the planet's largest issuer. So the product exists. The question is for what? As I say, at the moment, it seems to be just tied to solar farms. So what we're experimenting with in the SC is this. To go back to client adaptation, it's not bankable, right? I mean, if you build a seawall, what revenue do you generate? And so we realize that there's certain things the government has to pick up because there's a revenue. But if there are projects that are on the borderline, then there are tools like blended finance or insurance funds or capital funds in this case, to be able to absorb risk. Because you see, regulators don't look at climate as being like the end of worlds. We look at it as a risk issue. If our listed companies are oblivious to what's happening next and have not planned for it, they're bad investments. It's the same way that Makani explained it. From a central bank point of view, a bank having customers who are clueless is potentially a bank with lots of non-performing loans. So I would say that we have the tools, we just don't have the need yet. And I think one of the things that we need to accelerate is the adaptation plan. And again, this comes back to data, right? Where are we likely to be flooded? Actually, our problem in Malaysia is water. We either have too much of it or none. It rains a lot, right? So the problem is that most of my plantations have not invested in irrigation. So when it comes to a drought, the palm oil price, skyrockets because there's not enough of it. But I was told that it costs something like 250,000 US per acre to fix the problem. The question is where they're going to get the money to do that. So we're now trying to force people to sit down and say, fine, this is what the climate scientists are saying is going to happen. Longer droughts, more intense rainstorms. So maybe we're going to have to invest in major infrastructure assets to take this out. And that's where the supports and all that come in. If you ever get to Malaysia, we had a bunch of very clever Scottish engineers build us the first smart hub. So when it is dry, it's a motorway underground. But when it rains, they stop the cars and they use it as a drain. And it flushes the water through Kuala Lumpur to the other side. But it's smart. So we have dual purpose drain stroke roadway. So, we have to innovate.
Thank you, and that's Kendra.
Thank you so much. And maybe one last quick question. How came you going to go on and start with a really late progress? I mean, I was really quite concerned when I learned that the SDC concept of PICO, we discussed it before. So what is actually missing? What are we missing in the knowledge?
So, you know how Vice Chancellor talked about the history of being one of the first places that cheap coal happened, right? It's not, of course, no longer there. You have to look at the problems that Indonesia will have. They have significant numbers of their society doing mining. And so the issue, as I can see it, is that they're not really arguing the science. They're just saying, well, what do I do with the problem? I've got lots of people in the industry, and I'm a growing country, so I need cheap sources of fuel. And all the stuff that's being power. So all the stuff about having renewables and all that is fine in theory, but Indonesia in particular are, 10,000 islands? It's very difficult to put solar panels on little bits. So again, that would be an interesting task, which is how to power Indonesia without kind of impinging on their land issues, because it's only around the coastline that we have population, and they can't spare that land to do solar panels. What alternatives work for them? So I'm not sure I completely answered your question, but that seems to be the problem with clean coal in the context of Indonesia. It's that they're just too highly reliant. So we have started a conversation with them saying, well, we've got loads of hydro dams. Why don't we sell you some? So not quite the battery, but already there's a power line being built between Sarawak and Borneo and Singapore to provide that renewable energy. And I think Singapore was talking about a plan to use Queensland and kind of have power all the way up to Singapore. So we're having to sit down and think about these kind of things. But Indonesia has a huge job. I mean, putting aside power and no land, their capital is sinking. So, there's got to be a problem.